About a month ago, my son Declan turned 6 years old, and we had a birthday party for Declan. And it was a lot of fun. We were out in the backyard, and we were doing the bonfire thing. And after that, we kind of went back inside, and I had a conscientious friend of mine that said, "Hey, Kevin, we should probably go out there and dump some water on the bonfire, make sure it's out." And I'm like, Smokey the Bear would agree with you. Sounds good, okay? So he goes back out there, takes care of that. And I didn't think anything of it. Everyone else kind of packed up, they headed home. And Laura and I are sitting there, and we're kind of hanging out on the couch, relaxing, getting ready for bed. The neighborhood is quiet. And all of a sudden, I hear boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, whoa, what is that? It's like not just a knock, it's like an aggressive knock. I'm like, is someone trying to like bust into my house right now? What is going on? And I peer over and I see lights, and I see not just one firefighter, but I see like a whole squadron of firefighters. And they're like really ready to go. They got their gear on and they got their helmets and everything. I'm like, whoa, guys, this is kind of intense. And I open up the door and I'm like, hello, what are you doing here? And they're like, "Sir, did you have a fire on your premises earlier today?" And I'm like, yeah, I did. I had and I was like, oh no, what just happened? What's going on? Something dawned on me. And we walk in the back, and I realized what had happened is that my conscientious friend, when he went to dump the water on the bonfire, he had poured just enough water so that it was this like smoldering kind of like billowing cloud of smoke that was just covering my entire backyard. It was going into my neighbors' yards, and apparently someone had called to complain about this, which is great. I'm like, oh great, I am that guy. That's awesome. And so the firefighters go out there, they're looking all manly, and they get out the garden hose, and they're like, take care of the fire, and wasn't a big deal when they left, and everything was good. But even after the lights were gone and the firefighters were kind of out of the neighborhood, the cloud of smoke just kind of hung there in my backyard for a while. And even after the cloud kind of started to go away and dissipate, there was still like a cloud in my own heart of kind of like embarrassment and maybe even shame about this. I was like, man, I go out the next morning, I walk outside my house, and I'm like, goodness, everyone's going to think you're the guy that the fire department was here for yesterday. That's great. And I'm like, hey, I'm a pastor at Crossroads Church, everyone, But there's this shame, there's this cloud that kind of hung over in my life. Shame, it's a powerful force in our lives. And most of us, we have shame stories that are way, way worse than that one. I have a shame story that's way worse than that one. And it's always this result of the voice in our lives that says to us, you aren't enough. You aren't worthy of acceptance. And then there's this cloud of shame that kind of hangs over our lives as we walk through life together. And we've all experienced this weight that comes when someone says to you, shame on you. And we want to do the exact opposite over the next couple weeks. And today we want to say shame off you. We want to say shame off you. And if we're willing to listen today, I believe that God wants to speak that exact truth to you. And only God can speak it to you. Shame off you. Because I think there's some people here in this place, and as I've talked to people over the last week, there's been a lot of people that have said, that's me. What you talked about last week when we talked about shame, that's me. And I think there's a lot of people that need to find freedom from shame in their lives today. I think that I've never been so convinced that we need to talk about shame. This is a topic that we need to dig into. Because I think shame is it's like an epidemic in our culture. It's under the surface of so many things. And so many people, we don't realize that we live our lives and we walk through our life and we're actually stuck in shame. I don't know what that looks like for you. For some people, it's like a little puddle that sits underneath the surface of our lives. For others, it's like a pool that it feels like we're swimming in. But I do know this, is that all of us, every single person in the room, if you think you're the one person it doesn't affect, you're wrong. All of us struggle with shame. All of us deal with shame in our lives. All of us experience shame in our lives. All of us are carrying some shame in our lives. And last week, we talked about how this happened in our lives. We talked about the cycle of shame. If you were here last week, we discussed what I call this shame cycle. And what I said is it's like this carousel ride of shame that we're on, that we walk through this, that we move through this again and again. And what happens is we're on this carousel ride of the shame cycle, and we're feeling sick, and we're feeling like we want to get off the ride, but we don't really know how to stop the ride and actually get off the ride because we move through this over and over and over again. And so what I want to say to you today is that what if instead of running away from shame and running to all the wrong things, which is what we do, we think we're running away from it, we run to all the wrong places when we experience shame. What if instead we ran towards Jesus? And so this is the big idea. If you get one thing, this is the thing I want you to get today, that life change happens when we stop trying to fix ourselves, which is exactly what this is. It's us trying to fix ourselves. Life change happens when we stop trying to fix ourselves and we start fixing our eyes on Jesus. That's when life change happens. And so we're going to look at the difference between fixing ourselves and trying to fix ourselves over and over again, which is where we get stuck. And most of us experience this and we don't even really realize what we're experiencing. And we're going to look at the difference between that and fixing our eyes on Jesus. And as we do that, we're going to see that we can break the cycle of shame in our lives. Now, the writer of Hebrews was speaking directly to a group of people that were dealing with shame. And they were kind of moving through this. And this is the letter that was written, and this is the message that he spoke, that the writer of Hebrews spoke to the group of people that were experiencing shame. And it says this is Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and now is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. So run with endurance the race that is set before us. I mean, I love races. You guys, Olympics, anyone else Olympics? You guys like the Olympics? Who's excited about the Olympics coming in 2020? Summer Olympics are coming up. Someone's actually clapping for the Summer Olympics. They're that pumped about it. I know it's a little preemptive. I'm getting excited about the Olympics, but Summer Olympics are coming this year, and there's just something about races. I love them. Not running in them, but I mean, I love watching other people run races, I have a life motto. I only run when chased. That's, but, there's the word for race is actually agon, which is where we get our word agony. And some of you are like, oh, it makes sense now. Suddenly it makes sense. Run with endurance, the race that is set before us. The writer of Hebrews here is saying life is like a race. Following Jesus, it's like a race. And this book was written to a group of people who were really trying to run this race, and they were getting close to giving up. They weren't sure they were going to be able to finish the race. I think life is about finishing well. And the thing that stops so many people from running this race is shame. The thing that slows so many people from running this race is shame. See, sin and shame in our lives, they function like a weight to a runner. Like you didn't see Usain Bolt like with a backpack with a bunch of weights while he was running in the Olympics. No one runs with weights on their back, but that's what sin and shame are like. It's like trying to run a race with weights on your back. And so it says here in Hebrews, it says, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Shame will weigh you down. And sin and shame is this thing that you carry. It's heavy. There's a weight to shame in our lives. And so many of us are trying to run this race of life and following Jesus, and we're weighed down by shame. We don't even realize that that's what's happening. Shame is that intensely painful feeling, that experience that you're flawed and therefore you're unworthy of love and acceptance. It's that feeling of being marred. It's that feeling of being damaged beyond repair, of being less than. You look at everyone else and you think maybe I'm less than them, and it's that feeling of being unacceptable because of something you've done, or maybe it was something that was done to you. Maybe it was just something that you were associated with. Now, oftentimes we kind of connect guilt and shame, and there is a connection, but there's a difference, an important difference, because guilt in our lives it focuses on the what we have done. But shame in our lives focuses on the who. And what happens is we experience shame in our lives when we connect the what we've done with the who we are. And so guilt would say to us, you've done something wrong. You made a mistake. That's guilt. But shame would say, you are a mistake. You are something wrong. And suddenly we experience shame in our lives. And guilt and shame, listen, it's not a religious thing. It's not a church thing. It's just a life thing. Everyone experiences this. And when oftentimes we think we're going to grow up and we're going to grow out of shame in our lives, but actually oftentimes it gets heavier and heavier as we go along. And we start to carry these things, and it's different for different people. But all of us, we have this idea of the person that we should be, and then we have where we are in relationship to that. And I don't know about you, but I can never seem to get to that place where those two places meet. And it's different for every person here. For someone, maybe it was an unplanned pregnancy. For others, it was losing a job. Maybe it was trying to quit smoking. It's been 5 times. You still can't quit smoking. You don't know what's wrong with you. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's the hidden snack food in the closet that you don't want anyone else to see in the pantry, right? Or maybe it's the hidden internet history that you don't want anyone to see. It's drinking too much alcohol. It's not saving enough money. It's being embarrassed to go to the pool after a long winter. You know, that moment you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. Or it's being embarrassed about a DUI after a short drive that you took a long time ago. Come on. We all carry shame in some area of our life. We all have something that we wish we could erase. We all have something that we wish we could rewind and do over again. We try to drink it away. We try to medicate it away. We try to work it away. We try to give it away. We wish that we could wash it away. It doesn't seem like we can ever really do it. And oftentimes we experience shame. We believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with me that I don't measure up. And when we experience this, it's like the one thing in our lives. It's the one emotion in our lives that's basically intolerable. We can deal with all kinds of other emotions in our lives, but the weight of shame, when we really experience it, it's the one thing that makes us actually kind of want to stop running the race completely. And instead, what we start to do is we start to run in the wrong direction, to all the wrong things. Because shame is intolerable, we begin to run to all kinds of other things in our lives, and we don't even realize what we're doing. We experience shame, and so we run to alcohol, we drink too much, we get up the next morning. Because we drank too much, we feel inadequate all over again, unaccepted all over again, and then we experience this again, and we go in a circle. Or maybe for you, it's I ate too much food, and I feel inadequate because of that, unacceptable because of that, and then you feel shame, and then you go through this again. Maybe it's pornography. It's the website that you never thought you were going to go to again. You wake up the next day, you think, oh my goodness, I screwed it up again, and you move through the cycle again. Or maybe for you, it's perfectionism. You really, really try to do the best, to be the person that you think you should be. You run to perfectionism. You're never perfect. I'm never perfect. And then you feel shame and you move through this again. And what happens for all of us is we think that we're running away from shame. But what we don't realize is it's a circle. And we find ourselves right back in the same place. We push it out the front door. It comes back in the back door in our lives. It's a circle and it's a cycle in our lives. And listen, this was never God's plan. God never planned for this. And it's really interesting. If you go back to the very beginning, to Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, the way that it's described, that paradise is described, is that Adam and Eve were in the garden, and they had what? They had no shame. They were in the garden naked, and they had no shame. That is the primary description of paradise in Scripture. Sure, it talks about beautiful trees. It talks about clear skies. It talks about clear water. It's the most beautiful place that you could ever imagine, but the most breathtaking, the most profound thing about the Garden of Eden is that there was no shame there. The Bible could have said anything. It could have said they were naked and they had no fear. They were naked and they knew no sadness. They were naked and they knew no anger. It could have picked any human emotion, but why? It said, no, they were naked and they knew no shame. And shortly thereafter, Adam and Eve made a decision to sin. And things came undone, and chaos entered the story, and shame entered the story. And suddenly, shame is a character in the story, and shame is woven throughout history from that point forward. But God had a rescue plan. Even right then, he had a rescue plan. And so we're going to go to the rescue plan, and that's the cross, right? And so we're going to go to the cross because this is the point where we stop fixing ourselves and trying that over and over again, and we realize that we need to fix our eyes on Jesus. This is the point where we kind of shift our perspective in our lives. The cross is the key that opens the shackles of shame that we're living in that enslave us in our lives. That's what it talks about in Hebrews 12, starting in verse 2. It says this, looking to Jesus, who for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame. Life, it's about finishing well. And Jesus is here. He's running this race, and he's at the end of this race. He's crossing the finish line, and he's demonstrating for all of us what it looks like to run the race with endurance and perseverance. Whatever your idea of the crucifixion is, it was probably worse than that. We sanitize it, we censor it, the pictures that we see of it, it's much worse than what we can usually get our heads around. Just try to think about this. It starts and Jesus is whipped mercilessly until the flesh on his back begins to fall. And then he's stripped completely naked. Oftentimes in the pictures we see Jesus, he's got the white loincloth. No, they stripped him completely naked, and then they marched him through the streets so that everyone would say, shame on you, and they would laugh at him, and they would spit on him, and they would sit there and they would mock him. And then finally he walked up the hill called Calvary. And when he got to the top, they nailed his hands and his feet, and then they raised him up on a cross, naked for everyone to see on the top of the hill. And then with a thud, that cross slid down into a hole. And everyone is sitting there, a whole crowd, while he's up on the top of the hill, so everyone could see the shame that was on him. And they said, shame on you. And even in this moment, Jesus' closest followers, in the moment that he needed them the most, they ran away, and he was alone with our shame. In fact, I would say that for as difficult, as gut-wrenching, as the physical pain of the cross was, the shame was worse. That the worst part of the cross wasn't the physical pain, it wasn't the whipping, it wasn't the physical struggle, it was actually the shame struggle that he was dealing with. And we miss how huge this is. Oftentimes we think that what happens is that the cross removes our guilt. But what we miss is that the cross is actually much bigger than that. The cross didn't just remove our guilt, it also removed our shame. And we miss how life-changing this is. And I think what happens is there's a lot of Christians, there's a lot of people maybe even in this room, that you know that you're forgiven of your guilt, because that's what the cross did for you. But you miss that you don't have to walk through life with the weight of shame, because the cross dealt with that as well. And it says here, Jesus scorned the shame. Other translations say despised the shame. What does that mean? It looks like this, that Jesus, as he was experiencing the weight of shame in this moment, Jesus looked shame directly into its eye, and he said, and he put shame in its place once and for all. He calls on the cross, Jesus looks at shame and he calls shame out on the cross. And so while shame has focused its power right on Jesus in that moment on the cross, Jesus demonstrates in this moment that he has a power that's greater than the shame in our lives. And in that moment on the cross, he breaks the chain of shame for each and every person. I don't know about you, but I think that's really good news. I don't know about you. That for me is something that I think is life-changing and really is something that could change your direction today. Think about this. Think about how this actually worked. Adam and Eve, after they fell, the very first effect of sin in their lives is that they were naked and they felt shame. And here's Jesus. He's on the cross, naked in front of everyone on the cross. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the very first effect of sin, Jesus in this moment on the cross reverses the effect and the power of shame as he goes to the cross for you and he goes to the cross for me. The cross somehow takes the shame in our lives and the shame in this world and it diffuses it in our lives. Like for years and years, when you would look at the cross, the first thing that would think is shame. That's what that meant. for everyone in that culture. You looked at that and you thought shame. And now here we are, it's sitting in the middle of a room. And when we look at the cross, we don't think shame, we think grace. Because Jesus reversed the curse of shame in our lives. The cross exposes the lie of shame that we all listen to. When shame speaks to you that you aren't worthy of love, the cross says you're worthy of love. When shame speaks to you that you aren't enough, the cross says Jesus is enough. When shame speaks to you that you're defective, the cross says your maker would say something different. And when shame speaks to you that God is mad at you, that he's got his finger pointed at you, the cross says, no, listen, God has his arms wide open. He's just waiting for you to come home. That's why life change, true, deep, never the same life change happens when you stop trying to fix yourself and you start fixing your eyes on Jesus. When we do that, when we stop running away from our shame, when we stop dealing with the weight of shame in our lives and we kind of remove that weight, we start to run this race and it starts to make more sense as we run the race together. And the weight of shame is gone and every step that we take gets a little bit easier. You know, we can spend our whole lives trying to fix ourselves. That's what this is. And we all do it in a different way. We can spend our whole lives over and over again doing the same thing, expecting different results. But this is why Jesus and his message is different than any other religion. It's the only time in history where someone said, listen, I don't just have a solution for guilt and shame. Jesus said, I am the solution for guilt and for shame. And suddenly, when we understand this and when we see this and when we fix our eyes on him, we start a new cycle in our lives. Rather than a shame cycle, we start to experience a grace cycle. And instead of the darkness and the cloud that hangs over our lives, we start to experience joy, for the joy set before him. And the grace cycle starts with acceptance. The experience of being accepted, truly, deeply accepted, is the one thing that can reverse this idea that we're unacceptable, which is exactly what shame speaks to all of us, that you're unacceptable, that you're not enough. And Jesus made this message so clear on the cross. You are accepted. You are loved. Shame off you. And suddenly the weight of intolerable shame that we experience in our lives lifts as we begin to experience grace. I've personally experienced this where I feel physically lighter. I can't even really explain it to you. There's like a weightlessness when we feel and we experience true grace in our lives. And while we carry shame and it's heavy, grace actually carries us. And we realize in this moment that grace didn't just cancel our debt. No, grace is an invitation to a family. Like, shame speaks to you failure. And grace speaks to you, your family. Your family, you're a part of this. You're a son, you're a daughter. And that's why acceptance and grace, instead of moving us to isolation like shame does, instead of us moving us to isolation from God and from other people, instead we start to move towards community and towards connection, towards intimacy with God and connection with other people. But I just want to say, how do we live there? How do I live there and not here? Because it's so often that we get stuck here, we don't even realize it. And I don't know about you, but I want to live there. And I want to get really practical and give you a couple steps. I have to say, I think it's a process. I don't think it's a one-day thing. But in terms of a first step, I want to just say that you have to move out of the darkness and come out of hiding and into the light. You have to move out of darkness, out of hiding, and into the light. And that's both with God and with the other people around you. So the first thing I want to say is get honest with God. I think so often we think that we can't be honest with God. Can I just, spoiler alert here for just a second. God knows your junk. He's not surprised about what's going on in your life, right? God knows your story already, and he's not mad at you. He just wants you to come home. He wants you to be honest. And so I just ask, get into a habit of confession with God. There's this freeing thing that happens whenever you can get honest with God and you can say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'm struggling with. This is what I'm dealing with. This is where I'm stuck. And suddenly you find this freedom. You find this release. God's not wagging his finger at you. He just wants for you to come home. And so that's the first thing. Come out of hiding and talk to God and be honest about where you are. And then the second thing is to get honest with some people in your life. It's to find some safe people. Don't just tell anyone, but find the right person that you can share with in your life the shame that you're dealing with, or share a bit of your shame story with someone in your life. Because what happens, and this is what we do, don't even realize that we're doing it, is that we hide. We pretend, we put on a mask, we're not honest with the people around us. And when we're there, that's when shame does its best work. When we're hiding, and shame does its best work in darkness and with secrets. And so I don't know what it looks like for you. Maybe it's a small group that you're a part of, a community group that you're a part of. It's a care group that you're a part of here at Crossroads. For some people, just coming here on a Sunday morning is one step out of darkness and one step out of hiding, and coming into the light here on a Sunday morning is one step out of shame. The first time that you actually are vulnerable with someone, you speak what's going on in your life, it's kind of terrifying. You're like, what are they going to say? How are they going to react? But there's this freedom that comes whenever you realize that person says, me too. I'm experiencing that too. I've dealt with that too. And they have compassion with you, and they have empathy with you. Because I think this is the deal with shame, is we all think we're the only ones dealing with it. We all think we're the only ones that have this. But look around. There's a lot of people, and we all have shame in our lives in some way, shape, or form. I would say there's a great cloud of witnesses right here in this room. And I can imagine the writer of Hebrews, when he wrote this, he was thinking about like the amphitheater, as someone was running a race with perseverance. They were running as hard as they could, and there's this whole group of people that were cheering that person on as they ran that race. And what if that's what church was like? What if that's what our church was like? Like, there's all kinds of great pictures about what church should be in the scriptures, but what if church was supposed to be like a whole crowd of people that were cheering each other on as they ran this race called life, as they ran this race called faith, and they were running with endurance, with perseverance? So I'm not a runner. I think we've already established that. If it's more than a mile, I want to get on my bike and do the cycling thing instead, but my wife is an avid runner. And I remember the first marathon that Laura, my wife, prepared for. She trained, she sacrificed, she got up early to prepare, she did a lot of work to try to get ready for that, and she got a little bit closer and a little bit closer to this dream that she had had for a long time of running her very first marathon. I'll never forget the moment, the day of her race, that morning. She was excited, I was excited for her, and for the first 24 miles of the marathon, things were going really well. She was running, things were going well, but then something happened to her legs where something just went wrong. I'll never forget the text message that I got from Laura. Something wrong with my legs. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to finish the race. It wasn't me running the race, but it felt like it. Like, I so wanted her to win. I so wanted her to succeed. I so wanted her to reach her goal. And I just started praying for her, and I sent her some messages to encourage her. And Laura decided she was going to gather her strength. And it didn't matter how long it was going to take. She was going to put one foot in front of the other. It didn't matter what her legs felt like. She was going to finish the race. And so she fixed her eyes on the finish line. She continued to run until she crossed that line. Life is about finishing well. It's about getting to the very end and looking back and say that I ran this race called life with perseverance. I want to share with you a story of someone at Crossroads, Westminster, that I think is a picture of this. Steve Hoffman, I think he would say that that most of his life he was running the wrong direction. He was running away from shame. He was running towards all the wrong things in his life. Maybe he didn't even realize that he was doing that. And then all of a sudden his life changed when one person had an invitation and invited him to be a part of things here at Crossroads. That invitation changed his life. After Steve came to Crossroads and found a community here, he found out that he was diagnosed with cancer. And this church stepped up, and we cared for him through trials and difficulties. Running the race has taken endurance and perseverance. And just this past year, I had the privilege of baptizing Steve as he made a decision to follow Jesus with his life for the very first time. And as Steve was baptized, he didn't hear condemnation. He heard God speak to him, "Shame off you." And while the cancer that was in Steve's body was doing its best to beat Steve down, in that moment where Steve was baptized, he came up out of the waters of baptism with his hands raised above his head in victory. Knowing this past month that Steve's time here on earth was short, the Westminster team decided to go out and have a birthday party with Steve because we knew how little time he had. And it was just, for me, it was a reminder, listen, of how precious life is, of how short life is. It was a reminder that what we do here at Crossroads is about people. It's always been about people. It's always going to be about people. And I'm heartbroken to tell you that Steve Hoffman lost his life this week to cancer. But I have to say, his story is different because of this community and what Jesus did in his life. Steve really, really wanted to be here today to share his story, and I'm sorry to say that he's not here. But he would want us to share his story because he has a story of life change that's worth talking about. A few weeks ago, I was able to sit down with Steve and hear some of that story about what God had done and what this community had meant to him. And so this is Steve Hoffman, and this is his story.
Life before Jesus was just kind of run-of-the-mill, hectic, just run by the seat of your pants, didn't have any prayer, didn't have God in my life at all. I was born Jewish and didn't really have much for faith. Didn't have time for faith in my life. My name is Steve Hoffman. I just had a birthday. I'm 48, but a couple years ago I got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. You kind of feel like that's it. That's the end of this. But I don't get upset about it. Oh, I've got cancer. I'm gonna die. No. People need to realize is, hey, you're going home and that's where you want to be. I don't go to church because of the cancer. The cancer doesn't define me. The love that you find in the church, I think has helped in a way, because it's like a whole new family. An extra boost of, meaning. An extra boost of, there is a reason why I'm here.
Thank you guys so much. I can't even express the love that you guys have given to Steve. I have loved him my whole life, and so for you guys to love him and for me to be able to trust a community of believers to come around him, there's nothing else better.
Yeah, I'm going on the right path. All the hospital runs that I've done, I've never gotten scared. I've signed off on no resuscitation, no other way that I would have made it through that type of adversity if God wasn't walking side by side with me saying, I've got you, don't worry, we're going to make it through. It's made me feel very relaxed, very calm, knowing that He's going to take me home. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You go back home. You go back to, your maker. And I try to tell people, don't cry over death. Rejoice in the time that you had with that person, but know that you're going to see him again.
Life, I think it's about finishing well. And we can only do that when we stop trying to fix ourselves over and over again, running in a circle, dealing with the weight of shame. And we start fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author, the perfecter of our faith. It might feel like you're in the 24th mile. It might feel like your legs are cramping. Fix your eyes on Jesus. He's the one that started this race, and he's the perfecter of it. He's the one that's going to finish this race with you. He endured the cross. He despised the shame. Jesus finished well. And now where is Jesus? He's seated. He's seated at the right hand of the throne of God. He is ruling and he is reigning. God is still in control because that once and for all sacrifice that he made on the cross beats the sin and the shame in our lives. It is finished. We have won. Jesus now is seated in victory. I want to give you a chance to respond in your own heart and in your own life. I've talked to so many people, and as I've shared kind of about shame, I've had a lot of people say, yeah, that's me. I didn't even know it was me, but I'm dealing with it at some level. Maybe for some people, it's just kind of under the surface. For some people, you're swimming in it, and you don't know what to do about it. I want to give you a chance as I pray right now to just say, yeah, that's me, and for me to pray for you. And so I don't want to call you out or embarrass you, but I do want to pray for you if that's you today. So let me pray if you would bow your heads. Lord, we thank you for grace that's bigger than the cloud of shame that's in our lives. Lord, we thank you for your truth of the love that you have for us that transforms hearts, that transforms lives. And Lord, we know that I can say shame off you all day long, but Lord, people here in this room need to hear you speak that truth, shame off you. And so we're listening right here, right now. And so with heads bowed, no one looking around, I wonder if there's some people in the room that are like me. And maybe over the last couple weeks, you realize that if it's a puddle of shame, if it's a pool of shame, if it's under the surface, or maybe it's something that's really heavy in your life, maybe there's some people in the room here today that are realizing that shame is a part of their lives. Maybe there's a voice that said that they're a failure, that they're not enough. Maybe there's a voice that said they're broken or dirty or unforgivable. And maybe it was something that they did, or maybe it was even just something that someone else did to them or spoke to them at some point in their lives. Right here in this moment of prayer, if that's you, would you raise your hand? I just want to pray for you. Lord, I see hands all over this room, and I know there's a lot of people that are trying to run the race, and they're weighed down by shame. They don't even realize it. They're running in a circle over and over again, trying to find freedom, but then finding themselves back in that same place. And Lord, I just pray right here in this moment for freedom from shame. Lord, I pray that the people here in this room that are struggling with shame wouldn't hear the voice in their lives that says shame on you. Instead, Lord, they would hear so clearly, even right here in this moment, shame off you. That's what the cross spoke to us, Lord. And the cross was more powerful than our sin. It was more powerful than our shame. Lord, you came to live a perfect life, to get it all right, to be the person that we thought we need to be. But then, Lord, you were willing to go to the cross to die for us, to carry our sin, to carry our shame, Lord. And we thank you that we now find freedom and we find grace and we find you with arms wide open, waiting to invite us to be a part of a whole new family. Lord, we thank you for freedom in Jesus Christ. In his name we pray together. Amen. Amen. You know, I can't think of a better way to celebrate than a family meal.